Hello again, and welcome to another edition of the Brattlecast, a special podcast coming to you from the Brattle Bookshop in Boston, one of the most venerable and beautiful bookstores in the country. And with me, of course, is the proprietor, Ken Gloss. I'm Jordan Rich. We get together and talk about books and more. And, it's the holiday season, and if you walk down to your store, you walk through Downtown Crossing, famous for holiday decorations. But we thought we'd talk a little bit about Christmas and some of the Christmas iconic images that appear.
Well, one of the things about Christmas is there are stores that are open 365 days a year with people collecting Christmas. And I'm sort of going to touch a little on this and a little on that in this podcast, although probably each one of them I might go back at some point and could do a full podcast.
That's the case with most of our discussion topics, I think. But certainly Christmas is definitely in there.
It is, and there are so many interesting aspects. I mean, first of all, the history of Christmas, it's like most people don't think, well, where does it come from? Obviously, it's Christ's birthday, but what really was the date of Christ's birthday and how calendars have changed. But it almost goes back to there were a lot of, in Roman times, there was a festival called Saturnalia, and there were a lot of festivals and pagan festivals on the equinox, and this was the shorter time of the year. And in a way, Christianity took some of that because people were already celebrating the harvest, the year, the getting ready for the new year, and they wanted to adapt it because they wanted people to come along.
Sure.
So over the years, December 25th was where it came into. But Christmas as we know it now, I mean, sort of the American Western Christmas, in many ways started with the night before Christmas, Clement Moore. I mean, when you think of early colonial times, a lot of people don't realize Christmas was illegal. There were actually, in the 1650s in Massachusetts, there were laws making Christmas illegal, and you could be prosecuted for celebrating.
Boy, those Puritans sure had a great time back then, didn't they?
Well, they felt that Christmas wasn't a reason to go out and get drunk, to have a good time, to enjoy yourself.
Right.
So that lasted about 20, 25 years. I don't know that anybody was really prosecuted, but there were laws on the books. And then, like I say, when you get to the early 1800s, there was a man in upstate New York, Clement Moore, and he wrote a poem for his local newspaper, and it was the night before Christmas. And it got picked up and sort of expanded and more, and you can collect hundreds and hundreds of different editions of the night before Christmas.
As you hand me one here, what am I looking at? A little golden book?
A little golden book. Now, that's one of little golden books we could do a whole podcast on, too. But it's the type of book that you hear every Christmas. Now, one of my daughters, I used to read, well, actually I still do, every Christmas Eve I would read to her the night before Christmas. And as she got older, we had to do it on the same illustrated edition. And not only that, it got to the point where I actually did it on YouTube because when she was away from home, she could then YouTube it and listen.
That's a good dad. By the way, I've been honored to read this poem with orchestras, including the Boston Pops. It's a venerable, I use that word again, it's a poem that will last forever. It's so perfect in every way.
Well, but it's also one of those that is just fun. It's also fun to read.
It is fun to read.
But then, that was the 1820s. Then you start getting into the more modern, and of course the iconic Christmas story, Christmas Carol, which was in 1843 in Dickens. And I actually have an 1843 edition of it here.
Not just A Christmas Carol, however.
Well, it's amazing when an author puts out a very popular book. They're a little bit tight in the box.
I see. I'm just trying to remove. I'm going to let the expert do it. I don't want to mess it up. These are gorgeous, and I'm such a Dickens fan. Wow, let me take a look at Christmas Carol. Go ahead.
But in any case, what happened with this is the book was so popular, a publisher said, who was his published captain, well, gee, if that was that popular this year, let's put out another one next year, and another one the year after, and another one the year after. So there are actually 5 Christmas stories. But the iconic is, of course, Tiny Tim and Scrooge. And
So what I'm holding in my hands now is an original?
it's 1843, which is the original year. It's a
goodness.
slightly later edition, but it's beautifully leather-bound, makes a wonderful gift, and all the original illustrations in color. And that is the sort of modern-day iconic Christmas.
I never knew this, but there's a preface. I've never seen this before. May I? Charles Dickens, who signs it C.D.
Yeah.
I have endeavored in this ghostly little book to raise the ghost of an idea which shall not put my readers out of humor with themselves, with each other, with the season, or with me. May it haunt their houses pleasantly, and no one wish to lay it. What a beautiful sentiment.
Well, Dickens was a good writer.
He certainly knew what he was doing.
But
wow.
And it also, too, came out at a time when he needed money.
Yeah.
So he put this out pretty quickly, and obviously it was quite a success. But again, from the collecting point of view, there are hundreds and hundreds of different editions. And I've seen people who just collect Christmas Carol or The Night Before Christmas.
May I ask you a question, too,
Sure.
about The Night Before Christmas, which is a golden book. I see it's published 1949. And, of course, the picture of Santa Claus on the cover of this book is the Santa Claus we know of, which, if memory serves, Coca Cola had something to do with that. But this is the fat, jolly Santa. Back in Clement Moore's time, Santa might not have looked exactly like this.
Clement Moore's time, he might have been a little bit thinner. St. Nicholas
Right.
might have been thinner, but he had a beard. Sometimes he had a cane. He was also gave gifts to children.
Right.
Maybe not the celebrating Christ's birthday, but St. Nicholas. But now that you happen to mention that, there was an illustrator in the 1800s, mid-1800s, named Thomas Nast.
Right.
Now, he's very well known for doing political satire, the Tweed Ring in New York and all that. But one of his other famous things is he created Santa, the image of Santa as we know it.
Which is, of course, the more, shall we say, chubby, jolly, full beard, red suit Santa.
And what you're holding there is a Harper's Weekly magazine, which he illustrated for in 1863. And it's also interesting, it's a January because the dating sometimes to get it out for December, January. But Thomas Nast was the one who invented the Santa Claus, the heavy, jolly, but it was inspired by Clement Moore, the jolly.
Jolly, right.
And he's the one who enters through the chimney. And one of the first ones he did was for the troops in the Civil War, sort of the idea of Santa visiting the troops.
It's so interesting, Ken, because we just celebrated Thanksgiving, which, of course, Abraham Lincoln declared would be the official day. And now we have another Christmas sentimental Christmas moment that happens during the Civil War, one of the worst times in our history. I was referring to the Coca Cola advertising campaign, which you just happen to have again. We don't rehearse this podcast, folks. This is all off the cuff. So that is the more modern version.
And actually, a lot of people, this was a magazine, Post magazine from the 1960s.
Wow.
But it really was the 1930s and 40s when Coca-Cola took the image. And a lot of people don't think of Thomas Nast back in the 1860s when they think of Santa. They think of Coca-Cola essentially inventing the image. And it was on National Geographic. It was on magazine after magazine. And it's sort of the bright red, jolly, heavy. Somehow Santa always seems to have a Coke in the end.
Yes, he does. He does.
But that's one of the great things about collecting Christmas. You can go off and just collect the images of Thomas Nast. Mm-hmm. You can collect the books of Dickens. You can collect serious history of Christmas. You can collect postcards of Christmas.
I'll take a look as you describe them here.
One of the great things, I one time had a collection of Christmas postcards, and they're almost all the sort of jolly, sort of in between the Thomas Nast Santa and the Coca-Cola Santa. But I one time had a collection of, and this shows you also how people get into their collecting. the person I bought the collection from didn't collect just Christmas cards, didn't collect just Santa Christmas cards. He collected transportation Santa Christmas cards. So if you go through when I had the collection, it would show Santa on a sleigh, but it would also show Santa in an airplane. Then another one would be Santa on a boat, Santa on a steamship, Santa on a railroad train, steamship, a bicycle, and almost on skis even, which was very early for skis. But it was an amazing collection of just Santa in a hot air balloon, of different ways of delivering the Christmas presents.
Here's something really interesting, and we've been talking about the image of Santa, and on these postcards, some of the Santas are very traditional in the Western sense, but some of them, for instance, I'll just show one that came to mind here. This one here, which looks like it's European, is that from Europe, has a different look, the thin... Yeah, still the red suit, but the thin Santa.
Almost more the St. Nicholas.
St. Nicholas, right.
And Kris Kringle in a way. And then also, speaking of another book, I didn't bring it with me. I have it at the store, Miracle on 34th Street.
Oh, gosh.
And of course, then you have It's a Wonderful Life, which really doesn't bring Santa into it.
Which, but, if memory serves, is based on a card.
Yeah,
it's not. It wasn't a book itself. It was a greeting card of some kind.
And then you can branch out from that because
oh my goodness,
if the policeman and the postman were Bert and Ernie.
That's right.
Which Sesame Street.
Policeman and the cab driver.
Cab driver.
That's
were
right.
Bert and Ernie.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that when I pull off a subject like Christmas is you have all these wonderful images. You have the history of the images. You have the books. You have the first editions. You have the different stories. But they're all fun. They're exciting because how many people aren't excited by Christmas?
Of course.
And you can almost do it on any budget that you want to do it. I mean, a first edition of Christmas Carol signed by Dickens could sell in the tens or $50,000, $100,000. But a nice edition of Christmas Carol, just, a nice $10, $20, $30. The one you have in your hand is a slightly later, but it's the 5 volumes in beautiful leather binding is probably $500. So you can do it on any budget that you want. The postcards, well, when the person who collected these postcards, they were probably 50 cents and $1. Now they might be $1 to $5. Some of the more intricate transportation ones might be $10 or $25. And the reason for that is if you have someone who collects postcards of steamships and you have someone who collects postcards of Santa and you put the two together,
now
you have twice the number of people who want the postcard.
Exactly. I was just thinking when you mentioned Dickens, right around the corner, logistically from you, Dickens would appear on more than one occasion, Temple Baptist, I think, right there, and he would give an oration, probably a reading from the Christmas Carol.
He showed up at the Tremont Temple.
Right.
And twice. He was here, again, doing readings. But if you go to the Parker House at the corner of School Street in Boston, they have a Dickens room. They have the room that Dickens stayed in.
I just did an event there not too long ago, yes.
And one of the things that my father always loved, we one time went to a house in Cambridge area, and we got a letter of Charles Dickens written from the Parker House in Christmas Eve. So we had a letter of Charles, and he was thanking somebody for some gifts and mistletoe they had sent him on Christmas Eve. So you had a letter of Christmas Eve from Boston, from the Parker House, one of our really good friends and collectors, because that was one of those items that you get in sometimes, and you almost have to pass out who you decide to sell it to, because there are so many people who want it. But my father always, whenever Christmas came up, he'd pull that letter out, and then finally he said, this was such a good friend, such a good collector. Okay, we'll let it go.
We have podcast listeners now from all over the world, I'm happy to say, and I just want to express the feeling as I hold my hand over these books, these Dickens books that were literally available while he was writing and while he was at his peak. It's just awesome. It's an odd feeling, but it's a beautiful feeling.
And also, those were books that people would have bought and actually supported Dickens so
Right.
that he could write the next book.
Well, that's outstanding. There is, of course, so much more to talk about, as you say, with Christmas. Maybe we'll devote in future days specific shows to specific Christmas topics, but this was lovely.
Well, thank you very much. And I love talking about it. And there's just so much to do. And any subject can go off in tangents.
You and I are tangential in many ways. I bring something up, and immediately he has a copy of something that reflects what I brought up, and it is not rehearsed. I want to remind people, if you have questions about books, buying, selling, appraising, anything of the sort, visit the website, brattlebookshop.com. You can also send in a request for this podcast, and if you want to hear us talk about a particular issue or talk further about something, by all means, get in touch. And don't forget to download, subscribe, rate, and review the Brattlecast. Ken, as always, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, and Merry Christmas, everybody.